It was the third moonrise over the orbiting city of Nalthar when the air inside the quarters changed. Not because of a malfunction, not because of war, but because a human side. Commander Linara of the Selari race had heard many things about humans since they were allowed into the United Coalition. Loud, unpredictable, emotionally unstable, and yet strangely loyal. But she had never been stationed with one until now. Her new assignment was a quiet observation mission aboard orbital post 17B, circling a dead planet once scorched in the Zulath wars. She expected data scans, routine surveillance, maybe even boredom. But what she got was a roommate who hummed while fixing food and sometimes whispered to himself when he thought no one was listening. His name was Elian Rourke. Just Elian, he insisted. No ranks, no medals. He carried an old satchel made of animal hide and kept photos of people. He never explained. He asked questions that sounded simple but made her think for hours. Like, why do selari sleep with their hands crossed over their hearts? Or, do you ever wonder what your planet smells like to someone who's never been there? Linara didn't dislike him, but she didn't understand him either. Humans were fragile, emotional. Her people had evolved past attachment. Or so she believed. One evening, during the artificial dusk cycle, she walked into their quarters early. The metal door slid open with its usual hiss. What she saw next stopped her breath. Elian stood in front of the mirror, shirt off, body trembling. His back was covered in long, deep scars. They weren't fresh. No blood, just old pain, carved into skin and memory. His hand held a small object, a folded cloth with faded red corners. It shook in his grasp. And then he sat, collapsed really, onto the bench near the sleeping pod, head hanging low like gravity had grown heavier for him alone. He didn't notice her at first. Linara should have left. Quietly, respectfully. Her culture valued privacy, especially in vulnerability, but something held her there. Not curiosity, not intrusion. Something else. Something quiet and warm that flickered beneath her chest. Elian finally looked up. No anger, no shame. Just eyes full of storms held back for too long. Didn't mean for you to see that, he said softly. Just ... Needed to breathe without pretending. Linara stepped inside slowly. The door closed behind her. She didn't speak. But her mind raced. In her training, she was told humans suffered from something called emotional overflow. They broke when they felt too much. And yet, as she looked at Elian, broken wasn't the right word. He wasn't weak. He was still here, after whatever had cut those scars into his body. He was still here, still humming, still asking strange questions, still breathing. Who did that to you? She asked quietly, her voice losing its usual cold sharpness. Elian looked at his reflection again, then back at her. Not who? What? It was a place. A decision. I chose to stay when others ran. It cost me. A long silence filled the room. Then Linara sat across from him, her long silver fingers folding over each other, unsure what to say. Selari didn't talk about pain. Not theirs, not others. But for the first time, she wanted to understand it. You stayed. For someone else? She finally asked. Elian nodded. Always for someone else. That's what keeps us human, isn't it? The words echoed in her like a quiet storm, and somewhere in that silence, the bond between them changed. Something ancient stirred in Linara's memory. Stories told by the elder priests, long before the coalition, of beings who bore pain not as a wound, but as a gift. Who carried others' burdens. She thought those were myths. Old songs. But here, in a small dim room floating above a dead world, she saw one of those myths sitting in front of her, real and breathing, for the first time, She didn't see a human dot, she saw a mystery, and something inside her shifted. The next morning, Linara awoke before the shift bell. Her body followed the rhythm of her people, efficient, timed, precise. But her mind did not. It kept returning to the moment Elian looked up at her, not with fear, but with peace, like he had nothing left to hide. In Selari culture, to show your scars was shameful, something to bury. But he had sat there, exposed and calm, as if pain itself was a language. Linara dressed in silence and left their quarters, but the room didn't feel the same anymore. It held warmth now. Invisible but present, like heat from a fire you didn't see, only felt. On the command deck, she reviewed scans from the lower orbit. Seismic patterns from the dead planet suggested old energy pockets, maybe leftover tech from the Zulath war. She should have been focused. Instead, she kept glancing at the side monitor that showed vitals and motion from crew quarters. Elian had not moved for hours, still seated, still breathing. But motionless. When her shift ended, she returned quietly. The lights were dim, set to low comfort mode. Elian sat on the floor, cross-legged, eyes closed, soft music playing through a tiny device. It was human, acoustic, slow strings and faint humming. No words. That's beautiful, she said without meaning to. Elian opened his eyes slowly. It's called a lullaby. My mother used to hum it when I couldn't sleep. Linara nodded and sat down near him, though still with a respectful distance. I've read about mothers. In Selari tradition, we are grown in chambers. No mother, no lullabies. Do you ever feel like something's missing? He asked gently. She didn't answer right away, then said, I didn't, not until I met you. Elian smiled faintly, but his eyes stayed distant. She wanted to ask more. Wanted to understand how someone with pain that deep could still offer warmth. So she asked what she had been holding back since the night before. Why did you stay when the others ran? Elian tilted his head slightly, thinking. There was a girl, young, not human, couldn't walk. Her leg had been crushed in the collapse. Everyone else saw a lost cause. I didn't. You saved her? I tried. I stayed. That's all I could do. She died anyway. Linara's throat tightened. Then why? She whispered. Because she shouldn't have died alone, he said. The room fell silent again. But this time, it was not heavy. It was full. Linara realized that Elian was not like others. He didn't act brave. He didn't wear strength like armor. He was strength, quietly wrapped in tired words and soft gestures. She spoke without thinking. My people fear pain. We are taught to control it, but you let it breathe? Elian looked at her with eyes that had seen too much and yet still hoped. Pain doesn't disappear when you hide it. It just waits. But when you share it, sometimes it softens. Linara leaned back against the wall, her silver eyes blinking slowly. And your scars? She asked gently. They remind me of the moment I chose someone else over myself, he said. That's not something I ever want to forget, she didn't reply. But she understood. For the first time in her long, disciplined life, Linara felt something new, a need to feel, to understand beyond logic, to connect beyond duty. And as the lullaby played on, two souls sat in a quiet room, orbiting a dead planet, sharing pain that no scanner could detect. Outside the hull, stars burned silently, but inside something brighter had begun to glow. The next days moved differently. Not slower, not faster, just deeper. Every glance between Elian and Linara carried something unsaid, like ripples on still water. They still performed their duties, scanning surface data, reviewing atmospheric decay, logging energy shifts from the ancient battlefield below. But underneath it all was the quiet thread of connection. Soft and steady. Linara began noticing details she never cared about before. Elian's hands always moved with a purpose, even in small tasks. When he repaired the filtration valve, he spoke gently to the wires, not because they could hear him, but because that was how he treated all things, with respect. He whispered thank you to machines when they worked and placed his food softly on the plate like it deserved kindness. One evening, she found him staring at the planet below. You know, he said, from up here it looks peaceful. Linara joined him by the observation window. It wasn't. Over 4 million died during the Zulath siege. The ground still breathes radiation, Elian nodded. And yet, there's something beautiful about how it still exists, even after everything. She watched his eyes reflect. The scorched blue light of the dead world. Your people, she said softly. You feel everything so deeply, even ruins. That's the only way we survive, he replied, by remembering. She paused, then asked, and do you think I'm capable of that? Of remembering things that didn't happen to me? Elian looked at her, not just at her, but into her. If you're asking that question, then you already are. That night, Linara stayed up reviewing Selari records. She searched old files, tales once dismissed as folklore. One fragment mentioned a time before emotion was bred out of their kind, when Selari warriors wept during mourning rites and touched forehead to forehead in love. They called it the fire beneath the ice. She stared at those words for a long time. She didn't sleep. The next morning, the silence broke. Alarms rang across the outpost. The command deck flared red. Linara dashed to her station. Elian was already there, hands moving across the interface with calm urgency. We have motion on the surface, he said. Not tectonic, not natural. What then? She asked. He turned to her. A distress beacon. Linara's chest tightened. No colonies exist on that world anymore. Something's down there, he said. And it's alive. They stared at each other. Both knew what it meant. Someone or something had survived the war below. Or return. Command protocol required full review before action. But Elian's eyes burned with a quiet plea. We can't ignore it, he said. No one answers forgotten voices anymore. Let's not be like them. Linara hesitated. Then she nodded. Together, they launched the scan probe, directing it toward the origin point. As it descended into the dead world's dark atmosphere, Linara felt something shift inside her again, a spark of something dangerous. Not fear. Not curiosity. Hope. In the silence that followed, they waited side by side, shoulder to shoulder. And beneath their skin, two different hearts beat with one shared question. What would they find in the ashes? The scan probe pierced the cloud-thick skies of the dead world, diving into layers of static and storm. Lightning crackled along the surface as the probe's sensors blinked, fighting to maintain connection. Linara leaned forward, eyes locked. On the data stream, while Elian watched her, not just for the numbers, but for the emotion forming behind them. Signal is stable, she said. Reading structure, partially buried. And life? Elian asked. She hesitated. Then slowly nodded. Faint, weak, but yes, one life form. Elian's jaw clenched slightly. We need to go down, Linara didn't reply at once. Her training screamed no. Her instincts whispered protocol. But something in her chest, something new, said, yes. Maybe it was Elian's voice. Or maybe it was the part of her that had begun to change since seeing his scars. We prepare in 1 hour, she said. The descent was silent. They took an old survey shuttle, modified with thick shielding. Linara piloted. Elian sat beside her, adjusting the scanners, watching the readings. The planet grew larger beneath them. A wasteland of ash-colored stone and twisted metal remains. Even after all these cycles, the scars of war hadn't faded. Shuttle broke through the clouds, shaking violently. Elian pressed his hand against the wall to steady himself. Feels like the planet's still angry. Linara didn't look away from the controls. Maybe it remembers. They landed near a collapsed structure half buried in the ash. Black spires poked out of the ground like bones. A thin trail of smoke curled upward, the beacon suit sealed. Air compressed. They stepped out together. The wind was thick with dust. Everything smelled like burned memories. Inside the ruins, the signal grew louder. They followed it through narrow tunnels, down into the belly of what was once a command bunker. And then they heard it. A voice. Faint. Distorted. Help. Alone. Please. Linara froze. Elian stepped forward, gently adjusting the translator. It's not automated. That's someone real. They moved quickly, deeper, and at the end of a cracked corridor, they found a sealed room, half collapsed. Beneath rubble, a glass containment pod flickered with pale blue light. Inside lay a girl. Young, alien, small frame. One arm twisted unnaturally, skin pale with age or malnutrition. But her eyes were open. Barely. Linara knelt beside the pod, scanning it. Biological stasis. Emergency mode. It's failing. Elian leaned close to the glass. She's been down here for decades. The girl's lips moved again. I was left behind. Linara swallowed hard. She's one of the zulath. A child. Elian looked at her. Then let's not repeat their mistake. Linara hesitated. Her entire life she had been trained to view the zulath as enemies, destroyers of worlds, slayers of her people. But this child was no warrior, no threat, just a voice buried in ash, begging not to be forgotten. She met Elian's eyes. He didn't need to say anything. They worked together, slowly and carefully lifting the pod. Linara stabilized the energy while Elian patched in the shuttle's medical systems. As they ascended back through the clouds, Linara stared down at the world disappearing beneath them. Once it had been full of hate, full of death. But now, because of a human who refused to ignore a cry for help, that world had given them something else. A chance. When they reached orbit, Command demanded an explanation. Linara answered calmly, "We recovered a survivor. She is not zulath. She is a child." They couldn't argue, because in that moment, something greater had spoken, not rank, not law. But compassion. And Linara realized something else. Too, humanity's strength wasn't in its technology or power or speed. It was in its refusal to look away from pain, even in ruins, even in enemies, even in silence. Back on orbital post 17B, silence filled the medbay as the containment pod was placed in isolation. Dim lights glowed around the girl's pale body as systems scanned her vitals and life signs. Linara stood by the door, arms folded, heart strangely heavy. Elian sat beside the pod, speaking softly. Not words meant to be understood, but words meant to soothe. The girl's eyes fluttered open. They were gold, not bright gold, but faded, dulled by time and suffering. Her lips moved, dry and cracked. Linara stepped forward and adjusted the translator. Where am I? The girl whispered. You're safe, Elian said gently. You're not alone anymore. The girl turned her head slowly, studying him. Then Linara, you are not zulath. No, Linara said, her voice softer than usual. We are not. The girl blinked slowly. Then why did you save me? Elian's answer was immediate. Because no one else did. Linara felt the words settle into her like gravity. For hours, the girl drifted in and out of sleep. Between breaths, she spoke fragments, names, cries, songs with no meaning to the translator. Elian stayed at her side, whispering human lullabies, humming the same soft melody Linara remembered from before. Linaria finally asked, "What will Command do with her?" Elian didn't look away from the pod. "Probably isolate. Test. Question. They'll see her as an artifact, but she's a person." Linara nodded, and that terrified her. When she left the medbay to report the recovery, the commanding officer of the outpost called her into a private channel. "Commander Linara," said the voice, sharp and formal. "You've disobeyed protocol." "I followed a distress signal," she replied. "I found a living being." "A zulath child," the officer corrected. "High risk." Linara didn't flinch. "A survivor." There was silence. "We'll dispatch a recovery team in 72 hours." The voice said coldly. "Until then, keep it alive." The word hung like poison. When Linara returned to the medbay, she found Elian humming again, but his eyes were closed, not in sleep, but in memory. "They called her it," Linara said softly. Elian opened his eyes. "Then we remind her what she really is." "And if they take her, we stop them." Linara stared at him. That wasn't how the Seedsinsmo, the coalition, worked. But that was how humans worked. They didn't always follow the system. They followed the heart. Later, when the girl woke again, she looked straight at Linara. "Do you sing?" Linara froze. "No," she replied. "Selari don't sing." The girl's small voice responded, "My mother did." Before she stopped breathing. Linara didn't know why or how or what moved her, but in that moment she sat beside the pod and reached back into the oldest memory she could find, a selari tone from ancient rites, soft and low like wind through silver trees. She sang it. The girl smiled. And for the first time since the war, tears slipped from Linara's eyes. Elian watched, silent and still, as the ice inside Linara melted for good. He didn't say it, but he knew. This bond between him, her, and the child had become something deeper than duty. It had become family. Time moved slower as the hours ticked toward the arrival of the recovery team. Outside the observation window, the stars blinked softly in silence, but inside the outpost, tension grew heavy. Elian barely left the medbay. Linara split her time between duty and doubt, her mind filled with questions that had no place in a soldier's training. The child, who now responded to the name Kael, had begun speaking more. Not just fragments now, but full thoughts. Her voice remained quiet, always careful, as if afraid that speaking too much might make her disappear. "Why didn't they come back for me?" Kael asked one evening. Elian hesitated. "I think they didn't survive." Kael looked away. "But I waited." Linara knelt beside her. "And now we're here." Kael tilted her head. "But why?" "You don't know me." "Sometimes." Elian said, "You don't need to know someone to care." Linara watched Kael study Elian after that, like she was trying to understand a new kind of being. Something softer than the warriors who left her behind, yet stronger than any weapon. In the command room, Linara received the final transmission. The recovery ship will dock in 12 hours. The subject is to be transferred under full containment. "Do not interfere." She read the words twice. They didn't sit right. She turned to Elian. "They're coming. They'll take her." "What will they do to her?" "Study, interrogate, isolate. She's a child." "They won't see that," Linara said. Elian's jaw tensed. "Then we make them see it." The next hours were spent preparing, not for violence, not for escape, but for truth. Linara recorded a message to Coalition High Command. In it, she explained everything: the signal, the ruins, the child, and most importantly, the humanity in her survival. She sent it out on a secure diplomatic channel, bypassing the outpost commander. Elian, meanwhile, sat with Kael and showed her images from Earth. Forests, oceans, dogs, music. Are these stories? Kael asked. No, Elian said. They're real, and maybe one day you'll see them. Kael reached out, touching the screen gently, her small fingers trembling. When the recovery ship finally arrived, its sleek body docked without sound. Linara and Elian stood side by side in the main corridor as armored agents approached. Stand down, the lead officer said. We're here for the Zulath survivor. Ellen didn't move. Her name is Kael. You have no right to assign names. She's Coalition property now. Linara stepped forward. She's not property. She's a person. A child. And she's under our protection until High Command responds. You're obstructing orders. Then file your report, Linara said. But you're not taking her. The officer paused. For a moment, everything felt frozen, and then the officer tapped his communicator. We wait. The next 2 hours were agony. Elian sat beside Kael, while Linara paced like a soldier preparing for a war without weapons. And then the signal came. A direct override from Coalition High Command. Stand down. The subject is to remain in the custody of Commander Linara and human liaison Elian Rourke until further review. High Command will initiate official inquiry. Elian exhaled slowly. Linara closed her eyes. They had won. Not with power. Not with force. But with something stronger. Truth. As the agents left, Kael reached for Linara's hand. Does this mean. I get to stay? Linara squeezed her fingers gently. Yes, and you'll never be forgotten again. Elian smiled quietly. Something had changed. Not just for Kael. Not just for them. But for the future. Weeks passed. The station returned to quiet operation, but it wasn't the same silence as before. Something had changed within its walls, something gentle, and human. Kael began to walk short distances, her steps unsure but growing stronger. Linara adjusted the station's gravity to better suit her recovery. Elian showed her how to plant seeds in recycled soil compartments. They watched them grow, tiny green shoots rising from the dirt, new life in a place once filled only with routine. But change didn't stop at the walls. Linara received new orders from Coalition High Command. Not punishment, not reassignment. Instead, they wanted reports, updates, insights. They were watching now, listening. Because for the first time in many cycles, something unmeasurable had entered their attention. A human's heart. What are you thinking? Elian asked one evening as Linara stood in front of the viewing panel. She stared at the stars beyond. How strange it is that a child left behind could change the way we see everything. Elian joined her, his voice soft. Not strange, just overdue. They stood side by side, watching the planet below as its broken surface slowly disappeared in the station's orbit. Linara thought of her people, proud and disciplined. She thought of her old beliefs, that control was strength and emotion was weakness. Then she looked at Elian. He had never worn armor, never raised his voice, yet he had taught her more than any battlefield ever had. And Kael, her small presence, once seen as a liability, had become their greatest reminder of why they fought, why they explored, why they cared. There's something I've been meaning to say, Linara said. Elian turned. What is it? She looked down. Not in shame, but with a weight she had never known how to carry before, vulnerability. That night. When I saw your scars, I didn't understand. But now I do. Not just the pain, the choice. You didn't stay because you had to. You stayed because leaving would have broken something inside you. Elian nodded. That's how we're wired, humans. We carry each other, even when it hurts. Linara stepped closer. And now I carry you, both of you. Elian smiled, not wide, but full of something warmer than words. In the weeks that followed, a new routine formed. Not duty-bound, but soul-deep. Kael painted with dust and water, creating shapes she remembered from before the war. Linara taught her selari lullabies, once long forgotten, now reborn through shared memory. Elian wrote logs not for protocol, but for future children who might feel alone in the stars. They weren't just 3 survivors. They were a family, a human, a soldier, a girl who should have died, but did in single quotes. And through them, the galaxy began to remember something it had long tried to forget. That strength isn't in power, but in compassion. That truth isn't data, but the courage to feel. And that's sometimes what changes everything. Isn't a war. It's a bond. One no scanner can measure. One that starts with pain, grows through choice, and ends in love.